everybody. Well, you asked for a campaign diary for my current campaign that I play on the weekends fortnightly. So this is the first game that just happened today. So I thought, while I'm fresh from the game and it's all right in the tip of my brain, I would tell you about what happened. So the last weekend, the weekend before last, we had our session 0 where everybody got to meet each other. We're all basically, well, some of them know each other, but I didn't know any of them, so it was great to meet all these new people. And they came up with a bunch of characters, and this week was our first time actually playing the campaign. We had one person missing from the game, but their character was played during the course of events. And we started off the adventure with a bunch of... Oh, by the way, the setting is the Forgotten Realms. We're going with a sort of a traditional D&D baseline route for this story. And they all starting off at level 1. So we have on board a ship travelling from the Moonshay Isles over to the Sword Coast in a storm-racked sea. They are approaching the shore where the ship has gone out of control, and the dwarven shipmaster and his crew don't really realise what's going on. But from the shore, fishing on an overhanging branch in the Trollbark Forest, is an elven ranger named Leodan, who is a wood elf who has lived in this forest for the last 110 years, and he's watching this ship come dangerously close to the rocks. And he can see that there is an attack going on this ship, and that Sahuagin are actually using a large beast of some kind to capture the rudder and do damage to it and drive the ship into the rocks. So he's watching with great interest while he fishes. Meanwhile, on board the ship, Zev, who is a half-elven sorcerer and fairly young and naive, Rhea, who is a human fighter, Kaelin, an elven thief, and the dwarven crew are suddenly battling a bunch of Sahuagin who leap up onto the back of the ship. And this is a good opportunity to introduce the ideas of how the combat works, to get to know the mechanics of their characters in a nice big pitched battle. Of course, while I'm introducing them to the combat, I'm in no way holding back, and this is my opportunity to practice mob combat skills, which I do to great effect during this adventure. But it also teaches the characters to be aware of their surroundings and remain mobile during a fight, which really did go quite well. So the ship has multiple decks, but we only actually use the top deck of the ship for the entire combat. And on board this ship, we have sort of lower and higher sections with stairwells on either side. So there's two stairs which lead up to platforms, which create natural bottlenecks, and there's also masts in the middle of the ship, of course, which create a diversion for the combat to flow around. And there's a few props in the way of ropes and barrels and some anchors and things, but really not much else. So combat ensues, and Zev finds herself too close to the combat as the Sahuagin come in, and she gets hit with a particularly brutal attack right at the very start of it, where she becomes very aware that she has way less hit points than she can sustain any sort of combat damage from, and she backs up and goes behind the line of the dwarves, who have formed up a skirmish line at the rear of the ship. At the front of the ship. Meanwhile, Leodan has taken a pot shot at the large shark creature. It was some sort of a were-shark beast that is taking a chomp out of the rudder at the back of the ship and driving the ship into the rocks. But he misses. So he decides to concentrate his attacks on the Sahuagin for the rest of the combat, and manages to take out a few of them as well. So, yeah. Also, Rhea, the human fighter, and Kaelin, the elven thief, find themselves also being surrounded and mobbed by these creatures, but manage to use a fighting retreat quite well, and they use the disengage tactic to great effect to get out of the way of the mobs and avoid getting automatically hit each round. And so basically the fight devolved into everybody standing behind the dwarves and using ranged weapons, taking out the Sahuagin one at a time, until the Sahuagin leader was killed. He was a shaman who used his conch horn to call forward the beast, which clambered up on the back of the ship, causing great alarm amongst the players at the table. And then it marched forward, the leader got killed, the Sahuagin retreated and eventually jumped off the ship, and the dwarves were left facing this great big shark beast, which was killing them one at a time in a horrific fashion by literally tearing them apart and eating their entrails before the very eyes of the player characters. Meanwhile, the ship went completely out of control, slammed into the rocks, and basically everybody abandoned ship, and the players all managed to roll pretty well and either jumped off or shimmied down a rope and landed on the rocky shore. As the ship then ground and smashed into the rocks, the dwarves were killed and the Sahuagin threat was relatively over, but they had to get off the shore pretty quickly. The elf up above threw them down a rope and they clambered up into the treetop above, a few spears bouncing off the rocks from the Sahuagin who were giving chase, and they managed to escape across the treetops. The elf said, "Fine, you can come into my forest, but understand that your interlopers here, we don't welcome you, and I'm going to take you straight across the forest, over towards Waterdeep, across a part of the forest that I haven't been to for a number of decades, because I usually patrol the other side, which is thick with trolls. By the way, don't go down to the ground, it's very dangerous down there." And so they run across the treetops, and it's getting close towards nightfall. Then somewhere around sunset, they discover that there's a clearing where somebody has cut a road through the trees, and the elf spots that there's a human with a sack with a wriggling cargo inside, either a human child maybe or a halfling, and he wants to go down there and investigate. There's also a wagon. So they go down onto the ground and go and confront this individual, who turns out to be a noble mage named Zard, who has a kobold in a sack, and he also has a large dragonborn in a sack on the cart nearby. Zard is not interested in any sort of conversation and immediately launches into an attack of magic missiles against Leodan, which do a fair amount of damage. Leodan's then basically the entire group launches into combat. Meanwhile, a few rounds in, his Zard's companions, an elf named Oslon and a human monk named Norin, come up from a concealed trapdoor in the stone circle, which leads down to some sort of chambers down below. And they come up and say, hey, let's not fight. We can negotiate, we can talk about this. Zard has no interest in any sort of conversation and continues to attack, and eventually is killed. The other two, Oslon and Norin, then retreat down into the dungeon down below, and they go up and free the individual inside the sack. This is Zev, who's fairly kind-hearted. Goes up and frees the creature from the sack, and it turns out that it's a kobold named Kier. So Kier is very eager to not really answer any questions, but to go and free his master, who's up on the cart, named Zoz, a red dragonborn warlock, who is actually controlled by one of the other players at the game, but she's not present for this particular for this first session of the campaign due to real life events. So I end up playing Zoz as closely to what I've been described his character as behaving like as I can. So he's kind of a dick, but yeah, in a good way. So they decide to give chase after a brief negotiation with Zoz, where he agrees to go with them. They discover that the road which has been clear-felled through the forest has been created by some sort of mining company, a dwarven mining company. And of course this is a great violation of the sanctity of the forest, and they have not informed or in any way negotiated with the elves for access to this forest. And Zoz is hired by this dwarven mining outfit, as well as the individuals who captured him. Zard and Oslon and Norin have also been hired by this company. Zoz mainly as an enforcer or protection person, and the others as investigators or prospectors who are checking out for potential problems or resources along the way. Protecting those who are probably clear-felling the forest. Meanwhile, they have come to some sort of disagreement with Zoz, and trussed him up and were busy dragging his companion down into this dungeon down below. So everybody's very interested about this, and they decide to go down and give chase to Oslon and Norrin and figure out what's going on. So they get down the stairs, and no sooner do they come across the first chamber that Kier, the kobold, is sent ahead to discover what's going on, whether there's any traps. He discovers one trap and manages to recover a light crossbow, which he's very pleased about. And then he's immediately attacked by something which they can't see around the corner, with a short scream and a crunching sound. Everyone is very alarmed because they've quickly become endeared with Kier the kobold. It turns out that he's being munched on by a carrion crawler. Luckily, the crunching sound was one of his sandals and not his entire leg. The carrion crawler is attacked by the party with flame and spits out the kobold and immediately advances upon the mage, which is doing the most damage. Pitched combat ensues, and things do not go particularly well. For Leodan has already been damaged by the magic missiles of the mage up above, and in the midst of this combat manages to get reduced to 0 hit points and falls. Then Zoz throws the other side, steps forward, and realizes drastic action is required and lets loose with a blast of his flame breath. This further reduces Leodan's hit points total to almost true death, but Leodan is still desperately making death saving throws even whilst on fire. They manage to finally kill the kobold in a dramatic fashion, with its insides bursting out of its back and smothering the entire area in the fetid remains of the inside of this beast, and also consequently putting out the flames of Leodan, who is then tended to kind of roughly by the group, and then eventually he is a healing kit is used, and he is brought back to some form of stability. The party then decide that even though the situation is rather horrid and they're sitting in a big pile of goo, they decide to go and perch right next to the entrance where they can look down a stairwell which is leading down below, and is in good view of 2 other corridors, kind of like a T intersection. And they decide to camp out there and sleep and recover because it's been a busy day. In the second watch in the middle of the night, somewhat before dawn, they are disturbed by Oslon, the elf, who is sneaking up the stairwell, and the human Rhea lights up a lantern to see what's moving in the darkness, and they get into a conversation. Eventually, Oslon and Norrin manage to convince the entire party, Leodan in particular, who's very wary of them, that in actual fact Zoz is some form of an evil cultist, a worshipper of dark forces, and they were capturing him in order to basically bring him to justice. Somehow or other they managed to convince them that they should all go up to the cart because there are documents there which will prove their case. The investigation of the cart previously has shown that there is magical runes around the outside of the cart which, when activated, will allow the cart to be propelled without use of a horse, which is fascinating, and the group is very enamored with this cart and don't want it damaged. Upon going up, originally, just before this conversation took place, the elven thief Kalen and Zev, the half-elven sorcerer, had gone up back to the surface to discover that the dead body of Zard, the wizard, was being dragged away by a troll to be eaten in the forest. So they're very wary about travelling around on the surface at the night time. But they managed to go back up. It's getting on dawn. They think they're fairly safe from the trolls, and the entire group go back up to the surface. The elf Oslon and the human monk Norrin then jump up on top of the cart, and they start to do something suspicious. They are about to activate some runes on the cart, although being barked at orders to not do this. Of course, this is all their plan to get out of their trapped condition inside the tomb, and they just really wanted to get up to the surface to get away. So combat ensues once more, and a few shots are thrown from both sides, but eventually the combined power of all of the player characters does enough damage to basically destroy the illusion that has been activated on the cart, which, with some spoken incantations and the activations of the rune, created an illusionary image of the two standing on the cart and defending themselves against attacks. Meanwhile, they'd actually jumped off the side of the cart out of view of the adventurers who were arranged on the other side of the cart in a semicircle and had disappeared into the forest. Possibly a lethal move on their part because the place is infested with trolls, but I get the feeling we're going to be seeing them again. So the adventurers come to the realization that this was all a ruse, and they've actually been the others have given them a slip, and they go through the cart and find some documents which show that these guys were in fact actual cultists. That the tomb is some sort of giants. It was built by the giants long ago, and that Zoz is aware that this is actually some sort of document that a human researcher on ancient giant lore has discovered that this was some sort of exit from a much larger giant complex, and that down below there is some sort of super weapon that would collapse the caverns down below and plunge the entire forest into basically turn it into rubble and magma, which would destroy Leodan's home. So he's very keen to stop this and wants everybody to go down there with him to figure out how to save his home. Everyone else, of course, is more motivated by mercenary means. Zoz is also fairly obligated now because these guys have saved him. Zev is interested in the fact that there's some sort of noble quest, and it's getting much more like the sort of things that she'd read about as a child in the adventure novels, unlike the battle on the boat, which was extremely brutal. And all the others are basically just motivated by greed. And of course, Kier will go along with his Dragonborn master wherever he leads him. And that is where we left the adventure. The others are planning on how to go back down into the dungeon, and we will rejoin the game in another fortnight. And I'll give you another update. So, thanks for listening, everybody. If you enjoyed this, please let me know, and I'll tell you more.